The sun hung low over the frontier town, like it was tired of watching men do cruel things, its light slicing through the dust that swirled around the auction block. The air was thick with sweat, whiskey, and the sound of voices bidding for more than cattle. She stood at the center of it, barefoot, wrists tied in front of her, a tag pinned to her dress that read, Lot 7. Her hair hung loose, tangled by the wind, and her face was streaked with dirt and the salt of tears she'd long since run out of the strength to hide. 18, strong for her age, the auctioneer barked, slapping his ledger. Can work, cook, or keep company, depends what you pay for. Laughter rippled through the crowd like flies over a carcass. The girl stared at the ground, her breath shaking as the numbers rose. Each bid hammering a nail deeper into whatever piece of her still believed she was human. When the old man in the front lifted his hand to call 70, the crowd hushed, knowing what he meant to do with what he bought. Then a new voice broke through, low and steady from the edge of the crowd. 100, the words came slow, quiet, but they hit like thunder because of the man who said them. He stood taller than anyone else there, a giant in a worn duster, hat shadowing eyes that had seen too much. His boots were caked with trail dust, his shoulders broad enough to block the sun. The crowd turned as he stepped forward, each heavy stride scattering silence around him. The auctioneer blinked. 100? You sure, mister? I said what I said, the old man grumbled and backed off, spitting into the dirt. She ain't worth the trouble. The stranger reached into his coat and pulled out a pouch of coins that clinked like judgment. She's worth this, he said, tossing it onto the table. The auctioneer hesitated, then shrugged, greed overtaking conscience. Sold, he called, his voice cracking. The hammer fell, and the world seemed to shift. The girl lifted her head, eyes wide, disbelief flickering into fear. He walked to her, slow but sure, untying her wrists with hands so gentle she almost flinched. You're free now, he said, voice rough like gravel softened by rain. She stared at him, shaking her head. No one buys freedom. Then call it a trade, he said. You're paying for peace. When she didn't move, he bent slightly and said, You can walk, or I can carry you, but you're not staying here. Her knees gave out before she could answer, and he caught her, lifting her into his arms like she weighed nothing at all. Gasps rippled through the crowd, men stepping back as if his mercy might burn them. He turned and walked straight through them, the girl limp against his chest, her face buried in his shirt as he carried her past the saloon, past the jail, past the line where the road turned to open land. Dust rose around his boots, the sound of the crowd fading behind him. Where are you taking me? She whispered. To the river, he said. You look like someone who needs washing more than saving. She wanted to ask why, but the words wouldn't come. The sun dipped lower, painting the land in gold and sorrow, and when they reached the ridge, the wind caught his hat and lifted it for a moment, revealing eyes not hard, but kind, eyes that looked at her like she was something sacred that had just forgotten it. Hold on, he said softly. The water's waiting. And with that, the world that had sold her away began to wash itself clean. By the time they reached the river, twilight had turned the world to amber, the sky bleeding into the water until it was hard to tell where heaven ended and the earth began. The giant cowboy set her down on the soft bank, his movements careful, as if he were afraid the night itself might break her. She sat silent, arms wrapped around herself, watching the current twist and shimmer beneath the fading light. You don't have to be afraid, he said quietly, kneeling beside her. Ain't no one here gonna touch you again. She didn't look up. Why'd you buy me? She asked, her voice rough from disuse. Didn't buy you, he said. Bought your chance. Same thing, she muttered. Not to me, he said. One's ownership, the other's mercy. The word sounded strange to her, foreign and warm at the same time. He took off his hat, setting it on the grass, and dipped his hands into the river, cupping the water and letting it fall through his fingers. This is the same water the Comanche pray by, he said. Same that carried soldiers home and washed blood from the earth. If it can clean them, it can clean you. She flinched at the thought, shaking her head. I don't need washing. Then call it remembering, he said softly. You need to remember you're more than what they said. He reached out, slow enough for her to pull away if she wanted, but she didn't. His fingertips brushed her wrist, gentle as wind through grass. You got a name? He asked. They called me Hope, she said, but I don't think they meant it. Then I'll mean it, he said, and I'll call you that until you believe it too. The words cracked something inside her, and she looked at him for the first time fully, really seeing him, the rough jaw, the scar across his neck, the steadiness in his eyes that didn't ask, didn't demand, only offered. "What's your name?" she asked quietly. "Cole," he said. "Just Cole. You some kind of preacher?" "No," he said with a faint smile. "Just a man who's done too much wrong to walk away from right when it shows up." The river hissed softly against the rocks, the air filled with the scent of rain and sage. He took his bandana, soaked it in the water, and handed it to her. "Here," he said, "for the dirt, for the tears you couldn't cry." She hesitated, then took it, wiping her face, her arms, the mark where the tag had been pinned to her dress. The water ran dark at first, then clear. "Feels like starting over," she whispered. "It is," he said. "That's what rivers are for." They sat like that for a long while, the sound of crickets rising with the night. "You gonna leave me here?" she asked finally. "No," he said, "not till you can stand on your own without shaking." "And after that?" "Then you decide," he said. She stared at the water again, her reflection broken by ripples. "I don't know who I am anymore." "Then that's where you start," he said. "You build who you want to be, and I'll see that nobody tears it down again." The moon rose over the ridge, silvering the water, and for the first time since she could remember, she didn't feel dirty or small. She dipped her hand into the river, letting the current take it, and whispered, "Then I guess my name fits after all." He smiled faintly, watching her hand gleam in the moonlight. "Yeah," he said. "It does." And as the night carried them both into its stillness, Hope began to believe that maybe mercy wasn't a story told to others. It was something that could finally belong to her. They made camp a mile from the river beneath a cluster of cottonwoods, the night cool and clear, stars scattered like lanterns across a velvet sky. Cole built the fire the way men do who have lived too long in silence, every motion practiced, deliberate, respectful of the flame's power. Hope sat wrapped in a blanket he'd taken from his saddlebag, her knees drawn close, watching him through the flicker of light. "You don't talk much," she said finally. "Don't have much worth saying," he replied. "Then why save me?" "Because I remember what it's like to wish somebody had." She studied him, the lines on his face carved deep, the way his eyes softened whenever he looked her way, like he was seeing a ghost he didn't regret meeting. "You act like you owe the world something," she said. "Maybe I do," he said. "Men like me don't get to forget." "What'd you do?" He poked the fire with a stick, sparks rising like memories that refused to die. "Too much. But saving one person don't balance the scales. It just stops them from tipping worse." She pulled the blanket tighter, her voice quieter now. "You think saving me makes it better?" "No," he said, "but it makes it matter." The silence between them settled like ash, soft but heavy. She looked at her hands, clean now, pale in the firelight. "I don't even know where to go," she said. "You don't have to," he said. "You rest first. The world ain't going anywhere." "And you?" she asked. "What'll you do when I'm not broken anymore?" "Stay," he said simply. "If you'll let me." She blinked, surprised. "Why?" "Because leaving's what got me lost in the first place." The fire popped, throwing light across his face, and she saw the truth there. Tiredness, yes, but something gentler too, something she hadn't thought men could hold. "You believe in God, Cole?" she asked. "I believe in mercy," he said. "That's close enough." The wind shifted, carrying the scent of the river, the faint sound of water still moving under the moon. "What if they come after us?" she asked. "The men from the auction." "Then they'll find a man waiting who's done running. They'll say you stole me." "Then they'd be right," he said. "Stole you from hell, and I ain't giving you back." Her lips parted, not sure whether to smile or cry. "You talk like someone who's been forgiven." "Not yet," he said. "But maybe the road's shorter now." She reached out, touching his hand over the fire. "You think people like us get to start over?" "We already did," he said. The flames caught her eyes, turning them to gold, and he thought she looked like something holy made of earth and will. She let her hand rest on his for a long time before pulling back, whispering, "Then I guess I'll start believing too." "That's all it takes," he said. "Belief and breath." The fire burned lower, the night folding around them in peace. She lay down near the warmth, eyes heavy, and murmured, "Thank you." He tipped his hat, voice low. "Don't thank me yet, Hope. We got a long trail before forever." But as she drifted to sleep, her hand still close enough to touch his, Cole Hayes looked up at the stars and made a silent oath that if the world ever tried to break her again, it'd have to go through him first. The morning rose pale and wide across the prairie, mist crawling low along the grass as if the world hadn't yet decided to wake. Cole saddled the horse with slow precision, his breath showing in the chill air, while Hope folded the blanket and tied it behind the saddle without being asked. Neither spoke for a while. The quiet between them had become a kind of language. When they finally rode out, the trail stretched endless and golden ahead, the wind tugging at her hair, carrying the scent of rain somewhere distant. She sat sideways behind him, arms around his waist, and though her grip was light, he could feel her pulse through the thin fabric of her sleeve. "Where are we going?" she asked after an hour. "Wherever the river leads," he said. "There's always towns along water. Always people starting over." "You've done this before?" "Too many times," he said. "Never stayed long enough to call it living." She rested her cheek against his back, listening to the steady rhythm of the horse's hooves. "You talk like a man who's tired." "I am," he said simply. "But it's the kind that makes you grateful, not bitter." They rode until the sun climbed high, stopping beneath an old willow to rest. Hope slipped down first, stretching her sore legs. Cole handed her a canteen and tore a piece of bread from the satchel. "You eat," he said. "Ain't much, but it's clean." She smiled faintly. "Everything clean feels like a miracle now." He looked at her, the way the light caught the new color in her face, and thought maybe she was right. "You remember where you came from?" he asked. "Not anymore," she said. "And maybe that's mercy too." She knelt by the riverbank, letting the water cool her hands. "What about you?" she asked. "What are you running from?" "A grave," he said quietly. "One I dug myself." She didn't ask more. She just nodded, because some truths don't need company. They rested until the wind changed, carrying the faint sound of hoofbeats far behind them. Cole stiffened, listening. "Riders," he said. "Maybe 3. Hope stood quickly, her heart thudding. "From the auction?" "Could be." He scanned the horizon, the muscle in his jaw tightening. "We move." They mounted fast, the horse snorting as he kicked it into motion. The land rolled out before them, vast and open, nowhere to hide but everywhere to run. The hoofbeats grew louder behind them, close enough for Hope to taste the dust they kicked up. "They're gaining," she said. "Then hold tight," he told her, spurring harder. The wind roared past her ears, her hair whipping against his shoulder. For a heartbeat she thought they might make it, until a gunshot split the air, the sound sharp and merciless. Cole ducked low, the bullet missing by inches. "Down!" he shouted. Hope clung to him, her fingers digging into his coat as the horse thundered through the river shallows, water spraying like glass. The riders stopped at the edge, their silhouettes small against the dying sun. Cole didn't look back until they were halfway up the ridge, breath ragged. When he did, the men were gone, turned back or lost to distance. He slowed the horse, his chest heaving. "You hurt?" he asked. "No," she said, shaking. "You?" "Not today." She laughed, half sob, half relief. "Then maybe the river still remembers mercy." He smiled grimly. "Let's make sure it doesn't forget." And as the sun sank low and the world burned gold again, they kept riding, bound by the silence that had started to sound a lot like faith. By dusk, the trail curved into a stretch of pine and stone where the air smelled of smoke and rain and something that almost felt like belonging. Cole slowed the horse, his eyes scanning the horizon until he spotted it, a small, abandoned cabin leaning against the slope of a hill, half hidden by wild grass. "We'll stop here," he said. Hope slid down first, her legs trembling, her eyes tracing the cabin's shape like it was a dream she wasn't sure she was allowed to touch. "Someone used to live here," she murmured. "Someone who wanted to stay," Cole replied, pushing open the door. The hinges groaned, but the inside was dry, filled with old air and the faint scent of cedar. Dust hung in the shafts of evening light, and a single chair lay tipped over near the cold hearth. "It'll do," he said, setting his rifle by the door. Hope knelt beside the hearth, brushing away cobwebs, her fingers lingering on the stone. "I can build a fire," she said. "You sure?" "My father taught me before they took him." Her voice cracked on the last word, but she didn't stop. Within minutes the flame was born, small, trembling, but alive, and the light filled the cabin with color, painting her face in gold. Cole watched her quietly, the way she leaned close to the heat, her eyes reflecting both the fire and something he couldn't name. "You've done this before," he said. "Fire?" Starting again. She looked up, a faint smile touching her lips. "It's all I ever do." He sat beside her, stretching his legs toward the warmth. "You think this place is safe?" she asked. "Safe enough for one night," he said. "Tomorrow we'll see what kind of mercy the land has left." She nodded, silent, then unrolled her blanket near the fire. The room grew quiet except for the crackle of flame and the soft sound of wind pressing against the walls. After a while she spoke again, voice barely above the fire's whisper. "You ever think about what happens when all this ends? When there's no one left to save?" He looked into the fire, his expression unreadable. "Then maybe I'll finally rest." "You don't look like a man who knows how," she said. He smiled faintly. "Maybe not, but I can learn." She studied him for a long time, then said softly, "You remind me of the river. That a good thing?" "It never stops," she said, "even when it's broken." He didn't answer, because he knew she was right. The fire burned lower, shadows crawling higher up the walls. "You should sleep," he said. "I'll keep watch." "You always do." "Habit," he said. "The kind you don't break unless someone makes you." "Maybe I will," she said, curling under the blanket. "Maybe," he echoed. As her breathing slowed, he leaned back against the wall, his eyes tracing the flicker of light on her hair. Somewhere outside, an owl called, and the world felt too quiet for danger, too peaceful to be true. He reached into his coat, pulling out the small silver cross he kept hidden there, rubbing it between his fingers until the metal warmed. "Thank you," he whispered, not sure who he was speaking to, only that the words felt right. And when the fire burned down to embers and the night wrapped itself around the cabin, Cole Hayes finally closed his eyes, the rhythm of her breathing steady beside him, and for the first time in years, he slept without dreaming of the men he couldn't save. The morning came soft and gray, rain whispering against the roof, the kind that made the world feel half asleep. Hope woke first, sitting up to watch the drops slide down the window pane, her hair tangled but her eyes clear. Cole was by the hearth, coaxing the fire back to life, his broad shoulders hunched against the chill. The glow from the embers flickered across the scar on his neck, a long, pale line that looked like it had once been fatal. "Who did that to you?" she asked quietly. He didn't turn, just poked the fire. "A man I thought was a brother." "What happened?" "He lived," he said simply. She waited for more, but none came. Instead, she rose, pulling her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "And you forgave him?" "Tried to," he said, feeding another log into the flame. "Didn't work." "Why not?" "Because I kept thinking forgiveness was for him," he said, glancing at her. "Turns out it's the only way a man stops being tied to what hurt him." She moved closer to the fire, the light painting her face in gold. "You talk like someone who's already found peace," she said. "No," he replied, "just someone who's tired of fighting ghosts." The rain thickened, drumming harder against the roof. Hope knelt near the fire, holding out her hands to the warmth. "You think people like us deserve peace?" she asked. "Deserve?" he said. "No, but mercy ain't about deserving." She watched the flames dance, her reflection shifting in their glow. "I used to pray," she said softly. "Stopped when I realized no one was listening." "Maybe they were," he said. "Maybe you just didn't like the answer." She looked up, startled. And he smiled faintly. "Sometimes the answer's silence," he added. "That's still an answer." She thought about that, her hands trembling slightly as she reached toward him. "Then maybe I should try again." "You ain't got to ask permission," he said. She closed her eyes, the rain a hymn on the roof, the fire crackling steady between them. Her lips moved without sound, a prayer too private for words, one that didn't beg but thanked. When she opened her eyes again, tears clung to her lashes. What did you pray for? He asked. That you'd stop looking like a man waiting to die. He exhaled, slow, the truth of it hitting him harder than any bullet. And you? She asked. You pray at all? Not since my mother, he said, stopped believing the sky listened. It listens, she said. You just have to speak like you mean it. He nodded, then reached into his coat, pulling out the cross and setting it on the floor between them. Then you speak, he said. She hesitated, then placed her hand over it, her fingers brushing his. If we're still breathing tomorrow, she whispered, we call that mercy. And if we're not, he asked, then we meet the one who gave it. The fire crackled louder as the wind howled outside, but inside the cabin everything felt still, suspended in something sacred. Cole's eyes softened as he looked at her, and in that quiet, something wordless passed between them, a vow made of trust, not promise. The rain eased to a mist, and the first light broke through the clouds, faint but real, painting their joined hands in gold. Neither spoke again, because peace didn't need sound, it only needed to be kept. The dawn broke sharp and cold, a silver fog crawling over the fields as the sound of distant hooves bled into the silence like thunder half remembered. Cole was already awake, standing at the window with his rifle in hand, the light catching the edge of his scar. Hope stirred behind him, sensing before seeing the change in his stance. It's them, isn't it? She whispered. He didn't answer, just nodded once, eyes fixed on the horizon where 3 dark figures were cutting through the mist. They found us, she said, her voice barely holding steady. They've been looking since the river, he replied. Can't run forever. She stood, wrapping the blanket around her shoulders. Then we don't run. He turned to her, surprised by the strength in her tone. You sure? I'm done running from men who think they can own what they don't understand. He studied her for a moment, pride flickering through the worry. You're stronger than you know, he said. No, she answered, her eyes meeting his. You just reminded me? The hooves grew louder, closer. Cole checked his rifle, loading the last round. You stay inside, he said. If things turn bad. If they turn bad, we stand together, she interrupted. That's how mercy works. He almost smiled. You sound like a preacher now. You made me believe again, she said softly. He stepped outside as the riders came into view, 3 men with dust on their coats and greed in their eyes. The one in front, the auctioneer himself, grinned when he saw Cole. You got something that belongs to me, he said. You sold what wasn't yours to sell, Cole answered. Now you're here for what ain't yours to take. The man laughed, spitting into the dirt. I don't see no law out here, cowboy. You're looking at it, Cole said, leveling the rifle. Behind him, Hope stepped into the doorway, hair loose, eyes bright as firelight. The sight of her made the men hesitate, just for a breath, long enough for truth to find its way in. You touch her, Cole said quietly, and I'll bury you where you stand. The leader sneered. You think you can stop 3 of us? Don't need to, Cole said. Just need to make the first one count. The standoff stretched, the air thick enough to break. Then the youngest rider shifted in his saddle, uneasy. Maybe he's right, he muttered. The leader glared but didn't move. Hope stepped forward then, her voice calm but clear. You've already lost, she said. Not because he's stronger, because I'm not afraid anymore. The words cut deeper than any bullet. The leader's hand twitched toward his gun, but before he could draw, Cole fired. The shot echoed across the clearing, shattering the morning. The man dropped, his pistol falling uselessly beside him. The other 2 froze, eyes wide, fear overtaking fury. Go, Cole said. Take what's left of him and don't come back. They didn't argue. Within moments, the sound of hooves faded back into the fog, leaving only the river and the wind and the weight of what had been done. Hope stepped forward slowly, her hands trembling. You didn't have a choice, she said. Cole lowered the rifle, his breath unsteady. Always got a choice, just don't always get peace with it. She reached up, touching his face, her fingers tracing the scar. Then let me be your peace, she whispered. He closed his eyes, leaning into her touch. You already are. The fog lifted with the sun, washing the world in light, and for the first time in years, the air around him didn't smell like blood. It smelled like forgiveness. By noon, the sun burned bright over the clearing, the blood already drying dark in the dust where the auctioneer had fallen. Hope stood near the river, staring at the water, her reflection bending and breaking with each ripple. Cole had buried the man beneath the oak at the edge of the field, saying nothing, only working the shovel with quiet purpose until the dirt swallowed the last sign of what had been done. When he returned, his shirt clung to him with sweat, his eyes tired but steady. "You didn't have to bury him," she said. "Maybe not," he answered, rinsing his hands in the river. "But the ground's got to forgive before I can." "You think it will?" "It always does," he said. "Takes its time, but it remembers." She watched him for a moment, then knelt beside the water, scooping it over her face. "I keep thinking about what you said," she murmured, "about choices." "What about them?" "That they don't come with peace." He sat down beside her, pulling off his gloves. "Peace don't show up on its own," he said. "You got to make room for it." She looked at him, her voice trembling. "How do you make room for something when the past won't move?" "You forgive it," he said, "not because it deserves it, but because you deserve to breathe." Her eyes filled with tears she didn't bother to wipe away. "You make it sound easy." "It ain't," he said, "but it's the only thing that keeps the ghosts quiet." She nodded slowly, tracing the surface of the water with her fingertip. "You ever forgive yourself?" she asked. He hesitated, his gaze dropping to the river. "Not yet," he said, "but I'm learning how." "Then maybe I'll learn too," she whispered. They sat in silence, the sound of the water carrying their thoughts away. After a while, she reached into her pocket and pulled out the torn auction tag, the one that had read Lot 7. Without a word, she dropped it into the current. It floated for a second before the water swallowed it whole. "There," she said softly. "Now it's gone." Cole watched the ripples fade. "No," he said gently. "Now it's forgiven." She looked up at him then, eyes bright with something new, something like freedom. "You make it sound like forgiveness is alive." "It is," he said. "It's the only thing that keeps the living from turning into the dead." The words hung in the air, heavy and holy. She stood and offered him her hand. "Then let's live," she said. He took it, rising beside her, their fingers lacing without thought. "You sure you're ready?" he asked. "Ready ain't the point," she said. "Willing is." He smiled faintly. "You talk like a preacher now." "You started it," she said, laughing softly. The sound was fragile but real, and it filled the space where grief had lived too long. Together they walked back to the cabin, the river glinting behind them like a silver trail of memory. When they reached the door, she stopped, glancing at the horizon. "You think the past ever stops chasing?" she asked. "No," he said, "but it gets tired if you keep walking." She smiled, stepping inside, the light catching her hair like fire. "Then let's keep walking." "We will," he said, closing the door behind them as the wind carried the last of the fog away, leaving only sunlight, the river, and two souls, learning that forgiveness isn't the end of the story. It's the road that keeps it alive. The days that followed were still and wide, the land stretching in every direction under a sky so blue it felt endless, the kind of peace that almost frightened those who had forgotten how to live inside it. Cole spent his mornings mending the fence line, his shadow long across the grass, while Hope tended to the small patch of earth she'd turned into a garden near the cabin, her hands sinking into the soil like prayer. They spoke little, but every silence between them carried warmth now instead of weight. At night they'd sit by the fire, the world humming low outside, the crackle of wood filling the spaces where fear used to live. One evening as the sun dipped low, Hope sat sewing by the hearth, her needle flashing in the orange light. "You ever think about leaving?" she asked. Cole looked up from his whittling. "Leaving what?" "This. The cabin. Me." He smiled faintly. "Ain't nothing out there I've been missing." "You make it sound easy." "Ain't easy," he said. "Just right." She nodded, her fingers pausing over the thread. "I keep waiting for something bad to come again," she admitted. "That's what happens when you live too long with pain," he said. "You start thinking peace is the lie." "And it's not?" she asked. "Not if you fought for it." The firelight flickered, throwing golden waves across her face. "Then maybe I'll stop waiting," she said. "That's the hardest part," he replied. "Letting peace stay." She smiled softly, setting the needle aside. "You ever miss who you were before?" He thought about that, staring into the fire. "Sometimes," he said. But the man I was wouldn't have found this, wouldn't have found you. She blushed, turning away. You always say things like that, only when they're true. Outside, the wind shifted, brushing against the windows with a sigh. It feels different tonight, she said, like the world's watching. Maybe it is, he said. Maybe it's just finally quiet enough to listen. She crossed the room and stood beside him, her hand finding his shoulder. You think we'll ever be safe? Safe ain't the same as saved, he said. We're the second one. She leaned against him, the warmth of the fire wrapping around them both. Then maybe that's enough, she whispered. It is, he said. Always was. They stayed like that for a long time, the night deepening outside, the moon climbing slow through the pines. When she finally spoke again, her voice was soft enough to barely reach him. I don't dream of the auction anymore, she said. What do you dream of now? Water, she said. And you. He smiled, setting the piece of wood aside. Then the river did its work. She nodded, resting her head on his chest, her heartbeat steady against his. You think mercy ends? She asked. Never, he said. It just changes its shape. The fire dimmed to embers, and the sound of the river whispered faint through the night, carrying their reflection on its dark surface. He kissed the top of her head and whispered, We're still here. She smiled against his chest. That's the miracle, isn't it? Yeah, he said quietly. It is. Outside, the stars burned low and constant, the wind sliding soft through the pines, and the world, once cruel and wide and empty, had finally become small enough to hold in their hands. Spring came like a whisper of grace, the last of the snow melting into the river until it ran clear and alive again, carrying the memory of every soul that had once bent to its mercy. Cole stood at the bank, his hands deep in the cold water, feeling the pulse of it move between his fingers, steady and endless. Hope was beside him, her hair loose, her dress brushing the surface of the current. They had rebuilt the fence, planted the garden, patched the roof, all the small, ordinary things that become holy when done by hands once broken. It's strange, she said quietly. The world feels new, but it's the same river. Maybe that's what new is, he said. Same place, different heart. She smiled, tracing the ripples with her fingertips. You ever think about the ones before us? The ones who didn't get to start again? Every day, he said. But maybe we carry them by living instead of mourning. Then maybe that's what forgiveness really is, she said. Carrying what was and still walking forward. He looked at her, the wind lifting the strands of her hair like sunlight through smoke. You sound like you've been listening to the river. Maybe it finally started talking, she said. He smiled, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a small wooden carving, two hands joined around a single line, the same shape as the river's curve through the valley. Made this for you, he said. To remember. She took it, her voice trembling. Remember what? That you weren't saved, he said. You saved. She stared at him, tears catching the light. You always make mercy sound easy. Ain't easy, he said, just worth it. She laughed softly, the sound mingling with the water. Then let's make it last. He nodded. That's the plan. They knelt together, burying the carving in the soil near the river's edge. For what was, he said, and for what's to come. She took his hand, fingers small and sure in his. Then we named this place. What'll you call it? The place the river spoke, she said. He repeated the words slowly, as if speaking them sealed something sacred into the ground. The sun rose higher, the light spilling across their faces, warm and golden. You ever think the world forgets? She asked. Sometimes, he said, but mercy remembers longer than sin. She smiled, leaning into him as the wind carried their reflection across the water. Then I guess we're remembered. Always, he said. They stood there until the day grew bright and the sound of the river filled every space between them. Hope knelt once more, her hand brushing the surface. You still think it's the same river? She asked. No, he said, it's ours now. She looked up at him, her smile soft as morning. Then let's live like we deserve it. We already do, he said. And as the river moved on, carrying the memory of chains and blood and prayer, it took their names with it, not as burden, but as song, a hymn the land would hum long after they were gone. If this story touched something inside you, if it reminded you that mercy doesn't erase the past, it redeems it, then share it so others can feel the same light. Subscribe to Redemption West, where the frontier still teaches us that no soul is too lost, no wound too deep, and no heart too far gone for grace to find it again.